Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you are tuning in today. Welcome to today's event, and we'll be launching International Ideas Report, Combating Corruption in Political Finance, Global Trends, Challenges and Solutions, and engaging in important conversation about the role of money in politics. The report and this event have been made possible by the generous support of Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and the German Agency for International Development. My name is Khushbu Agrawal, and I'm an advisor for Money in Politics at International IDEA, and I'm delighted to serve as your host for the event. Today, we bring together an impressive group of speakers and panelists representing development agencies, experts, practitioners, policymakers, and civil society to reflect on practical solutions, share experiences, and explore how we can strengthen integrity in political finance systems, both at the national and the global levels. We will start off with opening remarks, followed by presentation of key findings from the report, which will be followed by a panel discussion and questions from the audience. Please feel free to note your questions in the chat, which we will take after the panel discussion. To start us off, it is my great honor to welcome Dr. Kevin Casas-Zamora, Secretary General of International IDEA, to open the day today. Kevin, if I may.
Yeah, thank you, Khushbu, and thanks to everybody for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a real pleasure to be with you today for this event launching International Ideas Report on Combating Corruption in Political Finance. At the outset, I would like to express my deep appreciation to Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, and the Anti-Corruption and Integrity Sector Program at the German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ, for their generous support in making this research possible. This report is a tribute to the value of partnership between International IDEA and its member states, in this case, Germany. As I was kindly introduced by my colleague, Khushbu, I'm the Secretary General of International IDEA. For any of you that don't know International IDEA so well, let me just say very briefly that we are an intergovernmental organization with 35 member states from all regions and an exclusive mandate to advance and protect sustainable democracy globally. We are headquartered in Sweden, where I am at the moment, but we have more than 20 offices around the world. And for 30 years, because this is our 30th anniversary, our work has combined knowledge production with capacity development, convening dialogues, but also engaging in policy advocacy. And we have particular expertise when it comes to electoral and constitution building processes, political participation and representation, and assessing the performance of democracies. And one part of this work, and an area very close to my heart, is the topic of political finance. You see, I'm a political scientist by training, and more specifically, a student of political finance, a topic that I've researched and worked on wearing different hats throughout my career. So, believe it or not, I'm a bit of a weirdo, but this is really fun to me. Even though you might not believe that, but it is the truth. You know, in fact, I first learned about International IDEA many years ago when I was a graduate student investigating the role of money in politics for my doctoral dissertation, and that's how I came across International IDEA's work in the subject matter. And that was many years ago. So in a way, this is, on the one hand, a kind of intellectual homecoming for me, but also a recognition of the very long tradition that the Institute has when it comes to researching the role of money in politics and how to regulate it and mitigate its effects on democracy. So I want to do two things very briefly. I mean, first, I will try and give a brief overview of the theme of money in politics and why it matters so much for the future of democracy. And second, I'll outline International Ideas work on political finance and the opportunities that exist to do more on this crucial topic. Look, the funding of politics is a major challenge for all democracies. And in some respects, and this might sound counterintuitive, political finance is unfairly maligned. Almost everywhere, the influence of money is blamed for all kinds of failures and shortcomings of politicians and political systems. Yet the truth is that money is a necessary component in any democracy. Money, both received and spent, enables political participation and representation. Money helps to spread the voices and ideas that are the basis for democratic politics. All the same, political finance is a clear entry point for narrow interest to exert undue influence over political decisions. And the failure to regulate money in politics compromises electoral fairness, undermines political equality, jeopardizes institutional integrity, and weakens ultimately democratic legitimacy. As citizens may well perceive that elections and governments fail to reflect their demands and interests. So, in short, money's role in politics fundamentally shapes public trust in democracy. Unsurprisingly, over the past 3 or 4 decades, virtually every democracy in the globe has enacted legislation to deal with this issue. And yet, political finance scandals continue to emerge all the time in countries as diverse as Brazil, Colombia, France, Israel, South Korea, and quite clearly the United States. No democracy, no matter how mature and rich, has managed to finally and for all time solve the challenges of political finance. I mean, there's no such a thing. Most regulatory efforts enacted throughout the world have been undermined in practice. First and foremost, they have been weakened by the lack of effective enforcement and the corresponding absence of transparency. And what is more, this black box that it has become, a political finance, is growing darker as many aspects of the role of money in politics, from fundraising to advertising to reporting to disclosure, move into even less regulated digital spaces. All this opacity compounds public doubts about who is funding politics and how these financial flows may shape political decisions. I mean, I could give 100 examples, but just to point to one that has been particularly conspicuous of late, one can mention Mr. Elon Musk's $270 million investment in the US presidential campaign to see how those doubts harbored by the public may be well funded. The future of political finance, hence, matters greatly for the future of democracy. And this is why money in politics has long been an area of significant interest for International Idea, as I said. In fact, we are one of the very few intergovernmental organizations, perhaps the only one, with a standalone program on the theme. Through this work stream, we provide in-depth research and direct technical assistance to governments, oversight bodies, and civil society in countries around the world to strengthen political finance regulation and enforcement. We also advocate for stronger global standards on political finance, for example, through the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC. At this year's UNCAC Conference of State Parties, governments can consider a strong resolution on political finance transparency. And I'm hoping and I urge them to seize this opportunity to secure and regain public trust in democracy. Transparency and accountability must not be optional. Stronger standards also require stronger funding. Despite its critical importance, political finance reform remains an underfunded area of democratic governance support. It's time now more than ever for this imbalance to end. Donors, international organizations, and democracy supporting agencies should prioritize political finance within broader efforts to strengthen democratic resilience and ensure that democracy is for all, not just for the powerful few that can contribute in big amounts to campaigns. If this mission speaks to you, and I certainly hope it does, please know that International IDEA is ready to be your partner. Much work lies ahead. The starting point, as always, must be a good understanding of the landscape and the opportunities. And that's exactly why this kind of comparative policy-driven research that this report represents is so crucial. So thank you once again to all of you for joining us. And I look forward to a stimulating discussion, which will surely be fun for me. Thank you. And Khushbu, the floor is with you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your inspiring words and the thought-provoking address, like always. Your reflections have set a very powerful stage for our conversation today. It is now my pleasure to invite Ms. Viktoria von Knobloch, Senior Policy Officer for Anti-Corruption and Illicit Financial Flows at the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, to deliver her remarks. Viktoria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Khushbu, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, to join this launch event for the report on combating corruption in political finance. We very much welcome the initiative from International IDEA to develop this report to examine the current state of political finance regulations globally, to identify challenges and also propose some best practices and solutions. We're also honored to contribute to the important work International IDEA is doing to advance democracy worldwide. From recent reports and publications, I think we all know that corruption continues to pose a significant threat to democracy. For example, this year's or last year's Corruption Perception Index from Transparency International highlighted the effects of corruption on the climate crisis and also shows that 2/3 of the countries have low scores with regards to perception of corruption, especially those in autocratic regimes. International IDEA's Global State of Democracy indices also show that perceived corruption has actually not changed for the better in the last 20 years, despite, among other goals, the Sustainable Development Goal on this, the target. At the same time, the last year was the biggest election year in history, with nearly 2 billion voters across the world, but also a high number of electoral corruption incidents, such as voter suppression, ballot tampering, media manipulation, bribery, getting closer to the topic. So, like Mr. Casas-Zamora already said, we also perceive that corruption impacts public trust in representative institutions and therefore impacts democracy worldwide. In this field, more specifically political financing, has of course lost none of its topicality. Some examples were mentioned: US elections having seen a huge influence through financial contributions going into the hundreds of millions. Even state-level elections now, like the recent Wisconsin Supreme Court election, witnessing politicization of and financial investments into voter behavior, even of individuals. In Europe, we've recently seen the leader of France's National Rally Party being convicted for embezzling public funds. From the European Parliament for party activities at home. So this really, for us, also has underlined the growing urgency of ensuring transparency and accountability in political financing, and of looking closer at the issue like we're doing now with the report. So before we dive into International Ideas report, and I really look forward also to the discussion that follows, I just want to briefly highlight how BMZ addresses these challenges through our democracy and anti-corruption work and our cooperation with the partners. We really consider protection of democratic values as a cornerstone of German development cooperation, because we believe that the Sustainable Development Goals can best be reached in democratic societies that are marked by integrity. So we collaborate with more than 30 of our partner countries on strengthening accountable and transparent institutions, civil society, civic space, public administration reform, and democratic values. We are also committed to protecting and promoting human rights, the freedom of expression and the freedom of the press, supporting civil society and media to improve access to information, hold government institutions accountable, and promote integrity. I think all important practices to counter illicit or difficult practices of political financing and to scrutinizing those. In addition, one of our so-called quality criteria is actually anti-corruption and integrity, which means that we're trying to systematically incorporate anti-corruption into our cooperation measures across the board in all of the different sectors. And we are very engaged in international fora, of course, always trying to open space through special side events, but also through just engaging in negotiations at the COSP, at the International Anti-Corruption Conference, and other conferences. One aspect of our cooperation focuses on private sector engagement. And I think that's an interesting point that also connects to the political financing field. We are a proud founding member and current supporter of the global multi-stakeholder partnership called Alliance for Integrity. And this alliance really promotes transparency and integrity in the private sector by fostering collaboration between the private sector, the public sector, and civil society. And we recently, with this alliance, concluded a democracy campaign called United for Integrity across 15 countries, more than 30 partners, to really look at how the private sector can actually contribute to a healthy democracy through integrity. And of course, political finance is one major area of relevance here. So yeah, I really think the report fits well into these efforts, because we see that political finance is at the core of good governance and trust in democracy, whereas unregulated and uncontrolled political finance can be a significant hindrance to development. So, of course, talking about political finance isn't just important to German development corporations, partner countries, but also to Germany itself. That's why I'm very happy to also see that some of the important German stakeholders joined today's launch event. And I really found that the report does a great job at highlighting the differences in regulations between countries or in practices, while at the same time getting to some common standards and best practices. So, for example, as you know, in Germany, the political finance policies are actually developed by parliament rather than the executive branch. But I'm sure we'll get to these kind of different practices later. Regarding our cooperation programming related to political finance, I can say that we work a lot with civil society organizations and the media to strengthen their position as watchdog and an advocate. We also strengthen anti-corruption bodies that may take an oversight role to effectively monitor and enforce compliance with political finance regulations. So to close, and I don't want to talk too much about the report because we'll just now hear about it, of course, from the actual experts. I would just like to underline again that we deeply appreciate our partnership with International IDEA, as well as your unparalleled access that we also see really shine through in this report. Your active engagements in high-level global policy forums such as the COSP, also at EU level, and with the regional and country offices across the world. You have established a network that is also very helpful to us in advancing democracy and anti-corruption. We do remain committed to that, and both in our policy engagement and in our practical cooperation with the partner countries. And in all of these efforts, International IDEA is a valuable partner. So yeah, thanks for having us, and looking forward to learning more about the report's key findings and the discussion that ensues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for your kind words, for your reflection on the report, but as well as highlighting the importance of collaboration in this space, which I think we'll be hearing from almost everybody, how important that is to really foster integrity in political systems. Next, we turn to the presentation of the findings from the report. The report shines light on the risks and weaknesses in political finance systems, but it also offers practical pathways forward. Presenting the report is my colleague, Dr. Yukihiko Hamada, who is the Program Manager for Money and Politics at International IDEA. Yuki, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kushbu. And hello, everyone. Right. Well, thank you for joining us for today's launch event of a new report, Combating Corruption in Political Finance. The report is now available from our website, and also you can scan through this QR code on the screen as well. And let me also begin by expressing gratitude to everyone who made this research possible, especially to our research team and external experts for their input, and to our donors, of course, BMZ and GIZ, for this excellent collaboration. The findings of this report draw on the data from our own political finance database, also case studies and reform experiences from around the world, offering both an overview of ongoing risks and also a hopeful look at what works. The report, of course, goes into a lot more detail, but for today, I'd like to walk you through some key findings before we kick off the panel discussion. So let's begin. Excuse me. Excuse me. And first of all, most countries have laws on books that prohibit donations from sources like foreign entities or anonymous donors. And when it comes to corporate donations, the picture is more mixed. About 27% of countries have banned all corporate donations to political parties, for example. But many others have chosen a more targeted approach. Instead of banning all corporations, they prohibit donations from state-owned enterprises or companies with government contracts. And however, and this is important, laws are only as strong as their enforcement. In many places, these bans look good on paper, but also easy to get around. Take anonymous donations, for example. While most countries ban them, only 90 countries in the world require beneficial ownership registers. So in the rest, it is still possible to channel anonymous money through corporate vehicles that do not reveal who's really behind the donation. And now let's also talk about transparency. When we say transparency in political finance, we don't just mean requiring candidates and parties to submit reports. We mean making sure that public can actually see and understand that information. And about 64% of countries make political finance reports accessible to the public, and that's encouraging. But let's not forget that in almost 1 in 5 countries, parties and candidates submit reports that are never made public. And even where laws exist, they don't always translate into real transparency either. Reports might be shared, yes, but in vague summaries or scanned PDFs or in formats that are nearly impossible for the public to search or analyze. Of course, there are some bright developments as well. We are seeing a growing number of countries adapting online portals that allow for real-time reporting and disclosure. But here's the bottom line. Disclosure without accessibility is not true transparency. If people cannot meaningfully engage with the data, we miss a powerful opportunity for public oversight. And also, when it comes to an emerging and often under-regulated area in political finance, our report highlights the issue of third-party spending. These are actors outside the formal party and candidate structures, such as well-funded lobby groups or party affiliate foundations, who run parallel campaigns that benefit certain candidates or parties. And the big concern here is that they're often not playing by the same rules. In some countries, the third-party campaigning have massive influence, sometimes even outspending political parties and candidates themselves. And this issue becomes even more critical in the current digital age. A single viral post or coordinated online campaign by so-called independent actors can reshape political public opinion without any formal link to a party or candidate, and with little to no transparency. Only a small number of countries, such as Canada and Mexico, have started introducing spending limits and rules for these groups. As you can imagine, the political finance corruption does not happen in a vacuum. It's deeply embedded in broader systematic vulnerabilities. Our report highlights 5 key challenges. Gaps and loopholes. So no country has a perfect system. There are always loopholes, whether it's unclear definitions, unreasonable donation caps, or blind spots in third-party and digital spending. These gaps create room for corruption to thrive, often just below the surface of legality. And enforcement challenges. Even the best laws mean little without strong enforcement. Oversight bodies sometimes lack the mandate, resources, independence, or technical capacity to do their job. In some cases, regulators are political appointees or work under threat, making enforcement selective or politically driven. As also Kevin mentioned, there's no comprehensive global framework to guide political finance reforms at country level. The only global instrument that we have is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCOC, and it includes political finance under its Article 7.3, but the language is still very broad and lacks operational guidance. And of course, let's not forget, political actors increasingly rely on data analytics firms, online influencers, and targeted ads, often outsourced to private companies with no disclosure requirements. These financial relationships are largely invisible to the public, and traditional regulatory frameworks are not always equipped to track them. And in some contexts, the threat is more dire. Organized crime groups fund political campaigns to secure protection or favors. Politicians, especially at the local level, may struggle to access legitimate funding, and criminal organizations step in to fill that gap. These groups exploit institutional weaknesses, undermining governance, public safety, and democratic integrity. And despite the scale and complexity of the problem, of course, we want to emphasize that there are solutions that work. And our report identifies 4 key areas for innovation and reform. Timely legal reforms. When laws are outdated or full of loopholes, we see, of course, abuse flourish. But countries like Brazil, for example, have introduced major campaign finance reforms following high-profile scandals. And these reforms tighten donation rules, raise transparency standards, and introduce heavier sanctions for violations. What's really important here is that countries should not wait for the next crisis. They must keep pace with changing campaign tactics and technologies. And too often, oversight bodies work in silos. But we are seeing strong results where electoral commissions, anti-corruption agencies, financial intelligence units, and other regulatory bodies collaborate. In countries like Mexico and Indonesia, these partnerships help track complex financial flows, share real-time data, and jointly investigate irregularities. And of course, technology is not just a threat. It's also part of the solution. Several countries are now testing, for example, AI-assisted tools to cross-check declared expenditures with vendor invoices. In the UK, pilot programs are testing automated red flag systems. And in Estonia, for example, parties use a fully digital platform to report finances, which then goes straight into public disclosure. That's transparency in real time. And in many cases, it's been civil society groups who've stepped in when public and official oversight lags behind. Investigation in Kenya and Slovak Republic, for example, have exposed illegal donations and underreported campaign spending thanks to the work done by CSOs. Civil society often drives the reform agenda, and working very closely with CSO groups would be a very promising avenue. So where do we go from here? Our report ends with a forward-looking agenda for action, both at national and global levels. And of course, while there's much more detail in the full report, let me give you a very brief snapshot of what we recommend for some of the key actors moving forward. For policymakers and oversight agencies, the first step is, of course, to review and close regulatory loopholes. We also encourage the development of digital disclosure platforms to make political finance more transparent, timely, and accessible. And crucially, we need to invest in oversight capacity, including the use of AI and the data tools. And just to echo with Viktoria, private entities has a huge stake in this as well, especially those making political donations. They must put in place clear internal guidelines with a strong sense of corporate political responsibility. And when it comes to social media platforms, compliance with political finance laws must be non-negotiable wherever they operate. And finally, for international organizations, governments, and civil society organizations, we urge you to support a global push for better standards and guidelines, whether through regional bodies or future UN resolution on this topic. We also encourage donor agencies to support programs in this space as part of the broader effort to fight against corruption. To close, let us return to a simple but urgent message of this report. Political finance integrity is not a luxury. It is a necessity for functioning democracy. And on that note, thank you for your attention. I will now hand over to our expert panelists who will explore many of these issues through their first-hand experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yuki, for that clear and insightful presentation. The findings give us a sobering picture, of course, but it also provides us hope and assurances that positive change can happen if concerned stakeholders assume their responsibilities. I remind our audience that the report is now available on our website and can be downloaded for your reading. My colleague Daniela will be sharing the link with you in the chat box. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome our distinguished panelists who bring a wealth of experiences from different parts of the world in different sectors. Allow me to briefly introduce each of them. First, we have Ms. Norma Irene de la Cruz Magaña, who is an electoral counselor at Mexico's National Electoral Institute with deep expertise in electoral integrity, transparency, and accountability. We also have Dr. Kitakandriana Rafitoson. She's the Vice Chair of the Board of Directors at Transparency International and Executive Director of Publish What You Pay, Madagascar chapter. She's a fierce advocate for anti-corruption, transparency, and civic engagement. And finally, we have Dr. Sam Power. He's a lecturer in politics at the University of Bristol and also a parliamentary academic fellow at the UK House of Commons. His research explores the intersection of political finance, party behavior, and democratic health. He's also actually one of the contributors to the report, so a special thanks to him for his analysis that shaped parts of our report. I remind you to post your questions in the chat box, which our panel members will respond to after the discussion. When possible, please include your organizational affiliation as well. So let me begin by asking the first question to set the scene of the conversation today. And my first question is for Sam. Sam, both Kevin and Yuki highlighted that some sort of regulation in political finance is present in almost all countries across the world. Yet, corruption scandals continue to happen, particularly related to political finance. Based on your extensive research and work on the interconnection between corruption and political finance across many countries, including the UK, why do you think these regulations have not fully worked?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for having me in this panel discussion. As you say, my sort of deep expertise in this area, partly through doing my PhD. And during my PhD, next to my computer was a very, very well-thumbed copy of Paying for Democracy, Dr. Casas-Zamora's 2005 book. So it's a pleasure to have him center stage on my screen here. But anyway, so
you're a brave man, Sam. You're a brave man, you know, going through that.
So what I'll say is somewhat repetitive of others, which is, of course, there is no perfect system. So therefore, given that there's no perfect system, there will always be problems. And money in politics is, in that sense, very much like water. It, in fact, flows uncontrollably. And it finds the gaps and the loopholes because people seek out those gaps and those loopholes, which makes it all the more important when they arise to close them. Which does mean that, you know, combating corruption in money and politics becomes a bit of a whack-a-mole problem, really. It's a bit like being in an arcade. There's always something that pops up and you've got to bash it back down. And I think that's partly also speaks to this paradox that we have, which is that money is essential in any democratic system. So what we don't want to do is over-regulate money in politics. I always go back to this, to the Federalist Papers, the sort of founding documents of the United States, who were not talking about money in politics, but they called liberty essential to the development of political parties, and liberty to political parties is what air was to fire. And I like to think of that in the same way as money. Money to democracy is like air to fire. You need money in politics in the same way that you need air to make a fire burn, but in the same way that fires can burn uncontrollably if you give them too much air, then perhaps democracies can burn uncontrollably if you give them too much money. So you do need to regulate them, but not too much such that that liberty, that fire goes out. And that's the challenge that we have, because what we end up in is a situation where we need to nourish democracy and allow it to exist and not over-regulate democracy. But that necessarily means that people and malign actors will seek those empty spaces which they can perhaps use. But that's all the more important that people who are dealing with democracies and people that are attempting to regulate money and politics are able to see where those threats are and close them down. And that's my sort of final suggestion, I suppose, as to why we see these, why we see scandals develop and corruption in political finance, which is that frankly, quite often the people in charge of monitoring these problems, more often than not in electoral management bodies, be that be that however they are developed, are underfunded and under-resourced. The state does not support them perhaps in the way that they should, so they are often fighting a war on many fronts that they are just simply that they struggle to do. So more resourcing such that these bodies can support this, I think, is essential as well. I'll stop there to let others on the panel reflect on that.
Thank you very much, Sam. I really loved your comparison of money and politics with air and fire. I think it will stay with me for some time. And you also mentioned electoral management bodies and the challenges that they face, which takes me to Councillor Norma, and she can probably fulfill what you were alluding to regarding the challenges as well. Councillor Norma, you know better than anyone that political finance is consistently ranked as the weakest link in electoral integrity. What are some of the key political finance breaches that you have observed in your work at the National Electoral Institute, and what impact do you think they have on democracy and development in Mexico? We don't hear you very well. There might be some problem with your connection. Could we? No, you are really not clear when you speak.
It's breaking up.
It's breaking up. Perhaps we could try without the camera. Perhaps there is some connection.
Norma, I can call you now and we can try again.
Okay, we can perhaps move to our third panelist in the meantime while we figure out the technical issue that Councillor Norma might be facing. So Kay, I'll turn to you now, and we'll talk a little bit about civil society and the important complementary role that they play in monitoring political finance and making political actors accountable. In your experience, what are the gaps that you have observed in making political finance information transparent and accessible to the public?
Thanks a lot, Kshubu, and hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to speak about this important topic, and congrats to International ID for the fantastic report. First thing is to say that I completely agree that civil society plays an important monitoring role. For instance, citizen groups in many countries have been monitoring elections for at least 40 years now, so our methodologies and impact are diverse and rich. And this monitoring is not a new thing, let's say. This makes our role specifically in monitoring campaign finance often central rather than complementary, as key safeguards are still lacking in many countries all over the world. We have seen that last year, which was a big electoral year, and as your report rightly warns. So what are the key information gaps we need to fill, to completely deliver on our role and also reach this common objective of transparency? Let me mention just 3 of them. First of all, we need information on media expenditures to gauge whether all parties, as well as men and women, compete on a minimum level playing field. This information is more challenging to obtain due to today's ubiquity and sophistication, I would say, of digital advertising. Political finance rules need to keep up with this development to bring outlets and platforms to disclose this information openly. Second gap, I would say another particularly complex piece of information we need, and around this we have a gap, is public spending to hold incumbents accountable for manipulating budgets and policies with the purpose to get an electoral advantage. Nowadays, I think that too many countries suffer from clientelism, patronage, or blunt vote buying that do not only hurt democracies, but also economies. CSOs like TI Madagascar, for instance, can use this information to more efficiently monitor violations of state neutrality on the ground and estimate the extent or report instances of state resources misappropriated or embezzled by incumbents. And of course, finally, we need political parties and candidates' financial reporting to be publicly disclosed comprehensively in accessible formats and timely. where possible, ahead of election day so that voters can make informed choices. But most of the time, this is also still missing. Information often misses elements needed for accountability, such as donor identification or donation amounts, or it is available in formats that are impossible to analyze systematically. For instance, we had badly scanned PDF images which you cannot exploit. So these may look like, simple and small things, but they are crucial to ensure the correct delivery of the work. So we can expose or prevent corrupt transactions between private interests and politicians, if and only if we have the full particulars of who donates what. So your report highlights the many gaps that persist in financial reporting, from expenditures by third parties, donors' identities and amounts, to the beneficial ownership of legal entities. But I'll stop there for now, and maybe you can speak about solutions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kay. And really, your message really is in line with what we also found in the report, that information is not available. And when it is available, it is not comprehensible. So I think we need to look at the overall structure and the manner in which that information is made available to the public. So thanks for highlighting that. I would like to check on Councillor Norma if she is able to connect well with us now. Could you please try?
Do you hear me?
We hear you, yes.
Hi, excellent. I'm very sorry about the
No
computer
problem.
on this technology sometimes plays again. And I was saying that I'm very happy to be in this lounge. For many of these electoral practitioners, all these reports, I see that they have been a very useful tool for all of us. And yeah, Kevin, there are some people that is passionate about political finance, even if many people find it boring. But here we are. As you will say very well, in Mexico, we have a quite robust legal framework. And we have seen many efforts or intents to navigate all these rules that we have. And when we say, we have faced some of these challenges. So from political parties that want to simulate financial activities. Just to put in context, in Mexico, all the political parties receive political finance. And it's one of the countries that is quite generous. Just to put it in perspective, this year, where we don't have electoral processes, all the political parties are receiving the equivalent for this year of $345 million. This is public money. Yeah. So, and it's not only for campaigns. This is for regular expenses. So for us, we just have, and it's not just the regulations. We have limits of how much donation can be done for individuals. Foreign money is not allowed. So we have a quite robust regulation, but even so, we have political parties that want to, for example, try to get donations. We have a new problem when we have, for example, all these donations with these new apps, digital apps, where they can use your card but doesn't register the origin. So that's having one of the try to hide from where the money comes from. The other is, for example, with donations, we found what they try to do triangulation. So I remember one case where the mother of one candidate to a local government give a very generous donation to the party. But when we revised that, we found out that some other company gave this donation and then it was transferring to the party. So, well, and they tried to do that. The other challenges we have is when, as well, we have to do for example, in political, during the campaign, the audit is, the reporting has to be almost in real time. So they have up to 72 hours to report in our system. So we know that is one of the intents, that they try to don't report on time, and that result in sanctions. When we do the revision and the audit of the regular spending, we do it from one year to another. So we know that there are some intents of trying to hide the origin or how the money was used, because it's not used. No, it's not only where it comes from, where it goes. And this have an effect, not just because, well, many of you that have studied Mexico have heard that in Mexico we part for we don't trust the process. So the fact that when you have political parties that try to circumnavigate the rules of political finance, when people know that this is public money, of course, it has a terrible effect in the credibility of the parties. Of course, make a big demand of the electoral management body to enforce all these regulations. That, of course, doesn't depend only in the electoral management body. We can say that we have all these, you are right when you say that some of these scandals make the scandals, and then we have the reform, and some of these scandals that we have in Mexico have helped us to do a response. Of course, we know we run to apply the law, but the way to circumnavigate, they run faster, and every process we found a new ways of trying. This is important. They try, and in the comments, I can share some of the elements and tools that we have to develop to be able not just to spot, to sanction, and to make public why we are sanctioning all of these parties and all of these conduct. So I think it is still a work in progress, as you say very clearly. It's not perfect, and we have challenged in every process because the evolution, at least in our country, the framework is have evolved very fast, and there are many rules that still we have to implement and materialize in a way that allowed us make a better audit in the use of this public money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Norma. And I think this first round of questions and your response to that really closes this circle about how just having robust legislation is not the answer, because malign actors will find loopholes or ways to put undue influence. And thank you very much for your work. We have great respect for the work that INE does in this area, and we look up to what you are doing and what you have been able to achieve. Thank you very much. For my second round of questions, I would like to talk more about the existing strategies, in addition to the challenges that are there in this area. And I'd like to turn to you, Sam. One of the aspects that we have covered in the report is on digitalization and its impact on political finance. As in any other field, obviously, if used prudently, digitalization can provide several opportunities, but it can also bring several challenges. Could you share with us how different political finance stakeholders can harness the promise of digitalization and minimize the potential risks that come along with its use?
Yeah, certainly. So I think one of the things that I suppose to talk about here is particularly the sort of the use of artificial intelligence, particularly because this is some work that I've been doing on this. But we can think about digitalization in lots of other ways as well. And I think in particular, we need to think about the threats and the opportunities that are posed perhaps by the embrace of greater digitization. Again, because this is some work that I've been doing. I think we do need to focus on the genuine potential of this, though. So one thing that we know, and that I mentioned in my first comment, is that largely, in fact, if not entirely, electoral management bodies are very time and resource poor, and in fact spend an awful lot of their time doing quite a lot of important manual oversight, which can be meaningfully digitized. So if we think about reporting of election spending and the analysis of the reporting of election spending, if we think about donations, all of this in the way it feeds into an effective transparency regime, a lot of this is conducted manually. A lot of this is then overseen manually by electoral commissions and electoral management bodies. And it just takes an awful long time to do that. And if we're thinking about elections, what's happened is that the election has been and gone pretty well significantly before any serious sanctioning happens. Perhaps a year and a half. I always because I'm English, so I can't talk about anything without mentioning football. That it's akin to a referee in a football game only being able to say if a foul has happened a year after the football game has actually occurred. And it's just incredibly hard to then have meaningful legislation. But what something like artificial intelligence does is it allows you to process an incredible amount of data incredibly quickly and can actually move us towards an ideal of analyzing data in real time. And a project that I've been working on is working with data given to the Electoral Commission in the UK and published on their website, and effectively trying to scan all of the information from those invoices of electoral spending and see if we can automate the analysis of where non-compliance has occurred, or where these invoices don't provide meaningful information. As we've talked about quite often, transparency systems are only transparent if we can understand what's going on. So if we can actually really push towards a process of digitization such that invoicing is standardized and accounting is standardized, it happens on online platforms and highlights red flags for non-compliance, what this can really cut down on is a lot of the manual oversight work, which just takes a lot of time and means that a lot of the compliance and sanctioning happens much later than it perhaps should. The dangers of this, of course, are that what we need in elections is trust. What we need in elections is trust, both from the stakeholders who oversee the elections and from people, right? People believe in democracy, and we need people to believe in democracy. So what we can never do is replace any of this oversight with these digital systems. The way that I like to think about the projects that I run are sort of harnessing the use of artificial intelligence to aid electoral oversight, always having this human in the loop, as it were, making the decisions such that we can embed trust in the system, and then ensuring that electoral management bodies are well supported such that they can actually use these systems to their advantage, such that they have the skills, such that these new techniques aren't just given to them and then they don't know how to use them. So it's not a silver bullet by any stretch, but I think there are genuine ways in which we can use digitization to our advantages, and we should be pursuing them.
Thank you very much, Sam, for highlighting the potential benefits and particularly focusing on the human touch, even when we are trying to harness technology, including artificial intelligence. I would like to turn now to Councillor Norma again. My question to you is, as a representative of an electoral management body that is responsible for political finance oversight, could you please highlight some of the successful actions taken by the INE to minimize the use of illicit funding of political parties and candidates and make political finance transparent in Mexico? You highlight, of course, challenges in the last question, but we would like to now hear from you what are the strategies you're using. We are experiencing something similar to what we experienced last time in terms of your sound quality.
That's right. Have you heard me now?
It is better, yes.
Okay. I think I can make all this complete. Or it's allowed. Yeah, you can hear me? No?
Not very clearly, I must confess.
Okay, so I think I passed
It is
from
better
all the
now.
things.
Yes,
better
it is
now.
better now. Yes.
Okay, thank you. But sorry about the video. Yeah, what I was saying, I think in Mexico we have in our electoral management body we have a fiscalization unit, or we say audit unit. The one of the key of our success, I think, had to do first with the collaborations that we have with other government agencies. For example, not just with the fiscal authorities and the revenue authorities, as well with, this is important in Mexico, for example, for us as an electoral authority, the secrecy of the bank secrecy doesn't apply for us. So we can ask for information, not just to the bank authority as the financial authority. We can cross-check information with other agencies. I think it is very interesting what Sam was mentioning. We do have a series of systems that help us to make more, not easier, but at least more efficient the audit of all these resources. For example, we have a system where all the political parties, we have for all the political parties, all their candidates have to register in this audit system to report all the expenses during the campaign. We have a system that monitors field activities. So when the party says, I'm going to have an event in X place, we have a monitors that go and monitor the events and check that if they say they use, they rented at a space, so that this is that match what they are reporting, the cost with what they are presenting. And we do have as well a series of systems that help us to identify all of that. And this, we have as well all these we can research and do investigations of some of these reports, and that allowed us as well to sanction the misuse of these resources. Of course, there are many challenges. We have very
Councillor Norma, did you mute yourself or?
Sorry, could you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes, but perhaps we can wrap up this intervention so that we can also move on to the third round of questions as well.
Yes,
but yes, please go ahead.
Thank you.
All right, but we will love to hear from you more in the next round. But for this, I would like to now turn to Kay. Kay, both Kevin and Yuki talked about the global standards on political finance, and civil society organizations have been calling for better global standards of political finance transparency from the perspective of Transparency International, which is spearheading these conversations. How do you see the role of global standards such as UNCAC on political finance, and how can they be further strengthened?
Mm-hmm. So I think this question is of a crucial importance, and I'd like really to seize the opportunity to appeal to the many democratic governments represented in the membership of International ID here to act on key particular points. So the role of international standards is key. We hear this from international and domestic election observers who are always looking for standards and norms to anchor their methodologies and recommendations in. We also hear this from CSOs who are looking for blueprints to strengthen national legislation. We even hear it from domestic stakeholders looking to safeguard their political systems from foreign interference in an interconnected world and financial system. Now, some regional standards exist, we know it, but very unevenly across regions, and that's a problem. Let me mention an example from my own continent. 48 African states are signatories to the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. This treaty binds them to adopt measures to incorporate the practice of transparency into political finance and also to proscribe the use of funds acquired through illegal and corrupt practices to finance political parties. As per International Ideas database count, about half of them have done so, only half. Transparency in practice was nearly non-existent a couple of years ago, if we get back to 2021, when parties and candidates' income and expenditures were available online in less than a handful of African countries. This is a problem. So electoral observation reports by the African Union barely address the issue of political finance. Africa is the lowest performing region in the world when it comes to disclosure of campaign finance, and as it has been measured by the VDEM project, for instance. So I would say that the UNCAC is the best forum for international standards on political finance transparency nowadays. The convention itself and the political declaration of the UNGA special session against corruption already established the obligation for UN member states and state parties to the convention to take measures to enhance the transparency of political finance. However, I'd say that much more detailed guidelines are needed today, and we believe that the time is now ripe for a COSP resolution on political finance transparency. In over 20 years and more than 80 resolutions passed, it's a shame that there still has not been one on this crucial global issue. So I'm really appealing to the membership of International IDEA here, including Norway, Ghana, Mongolia, and all possible allies, to join the UNCAC COSP efforts. We need more support and collective action in the lead up to Doha. And to close up with, beyond the UNCAC, we believe also that there are other multilateral spaces and instruments where standards on political finance should be promoted. To highlight just two of them, there is the European Union and Anti-Corruption Directive, or a new, also OECD recommendation on this policy area, as you know. Those will be important avenues for future standard setting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kay. We are hoping that by the end of the year, when the conference is happening in Doha, we'll have some positive and bright shoots to look up to. This last round of question is more forward-looking, and I would appeal to our panelists to be very brief, because we have a very interesting and very relevant questions coming in from our audience. So this question, it's the same question for all of you, and I would like to listen to your reflections. So my question to all three of you is, from your perspective, what concrete actions need to be taken and by whom in order to advance effective measures to ensure integrity in political finance? And what opportunities are there for collaboration between stakeholders across sectors, including those who are represented in this panel and in this room today? So perhaps, Kay, you can continue and you can share your perspective.
Definitely, thank you. So I will mention two key things, concrete actions for me, and there are two broad categories. The first is the implementation of existing standards, norms, and legislation. We observe and data from assessments such as the Global Data Barometer. They show that even among countries with a relatively advanced legal framework on political finance, we see an implementation gap when it comes to the practice. And all of the panelists here have mentioned that, so it's important. Secondly, many countries that already have the legal framework in place may benefit from updating laws and regulation to reflect changes in the political, economic, and communications landscape. This includes the increased prevalence of online campaigning, which exacerbates old issues such as anonymous and foreign donations. Undue influence from affluent donors across borders has also raised the question of carefully considering restrictions and limits. So these are key things I think that we need to work on more seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay, for touching on very important issues. I'll now turn to Councillor Norma, if you can also share your perspective on this issue.
Thank you very much. I think Kete was spot on when we are talking about how we're going to face this new way of making campaigns, of making politics through the digital landscape. I think this is one of the challenge, because this demand as well the cooperation with other stakeholders, and for example the big data companies, big tech companies, they play a role, and I think we have to consider them as stakeholders, because many of the new landscape of how politics is done in this digital landscape, I think we are putting aside. So I think this is very important. The other thing is, I think political parties and candidates have to retake this compromise, not just with the authorities, but with the citizens that are going to vote for them. So I think the obligation of assume all responsibility, not just as authority, electoral authorities, the civil society organization, and the demand as well, the political parties, because otherwise, how they're going to become an option for the citizen, the citizenry to elect these representatives. I think I believe these are two of the main topics I would put in the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm again hearing a lot about collaboration and the role that private entities, including tech companies and social media platforms, can play. So thank you for that reflection. Finally, Sam, I would love to hear your reflection as well.
Yes, I'll try and be brief, because I think we've covered a lot of it. And what I will say is broadly based around collaboration. But what I mean by that is a real active collaboration based around the way in which we can work together as different stakeholders in the pursuit of something that we would like. And what I mean by that is that we have electoral management bodies, we have experts, we have civil society organizations, we have big tech companies who I truly believe are all sort of pointing at the same goal, which is we like to operate and live in a democracy. And therefore we want democracy to be supported. And we all have different elements of expertise in the way in which we can do this. So I think if, big tech organizations who often have a lot of the skills to push us towards digitization actually worked with electoral management bodies and experts who have been studying this for a long time, who then embedded some of those skills with electoral management bodies that need it, civil society organizations who can help out to do many of these things, we can start to fill the gaps where legislation isn't, and we can start to really address that whack-a-mole problem, because legislation will always move more slowly than the risks. But actually, if we work together to sort of see where the risks are, think about those risks and address them together, we can sort of start to fill some of those gaps. But we need to rely on the different skills that we all have and the genuine incentives and interests that we have to sort of support democratic processes. So a really active collaboration between all these stakeholders, I think, is the key.
Thank you, Sam. That's a very encouraging remark to close the formal questions and answers round for the panel discussion. We have already received some questions from the audience, but I'd like to remind our audience to please share your questions or even reflections. We are very interested to hear about your experiences from your own work and your own countries. And for this round of question and answer, I would like to also invite Kevin, Yuki, as well as Viktoria to please take on any question that you would like to respond to. The first question that we have received is from George Mahalangu. He's from the IEC South Africa, which is Electoral Commission of South Africa. And the question that he's posed is, given that finance has become a scarce resource for many governments, can't we, where possible, promote public funding over private funding? Public money may be more easily regulated through government oversight. For example, in South Africa, there is a progressive fund called the Multi-Party Democracy Fund that receives private contributions and is shared among all represented parties. Who would like to take that question? Anybody from those online? Kevin, Yuki?
I have a few.
Okay, I see your, yes, please go
Sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, just that's a powerful and timely point, George. I think that public funding, especially when designed transparently and equitably, can serve as a critical tool to reduce the outsized influence of private wealth in politics, also level the playing field among political actors, and restore public trust in electoral processes. When properly regulated, public funds can also offer governments a way to, I would say, incentivize cleaner campaigns, set conditions for ethical behavior, and ensure that political competition reflects ideas and public service, not just the size of a donor's wallet, I would say. So I believe you are from South Africa, and pointedly, the example of South Africa's multi-party democracy fund is indeed progressive. I would say it blends public accountability with participatory contribution, allowing individuals and entities to support the democratic process without really favoring any particular party. So this model could offer valuable lessons to countries exploring hybrid systems of funding that respect political pluralism and minimize undue influence. So, but nonetheless, it won't work everywhere. In countries like Madagascar, for instance, where we have, very weak regulations, poor political will, and a really strong lack of transparency, that would be dangerous to enter this era. We need to clean up the scene first before going there, but yeah, that can be a solution to scale up. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
Right.
Yuki, yes.
If I may, I also just jumped on what Kay has just mentioned. We also think public funding has a very good potential to level the playing field among different political parties. But I think that we need to be mindful there are certain conditions attached for public funding to be successful. First of all, there has to be certain level of public funding injected into this, because unless there's a meaningful amount of public funding to allow political parties to operate, political parties and candidates continue to rely on and need to seek the additional funding to fund their activities. So there has to be certain political will and support from the public to use taxpayers' money for political parties at some significant level to offset the reliance on private funding. And also, once the system is designed, I think it's very important to design that the system is accessible to all political parties. So we need to be mindful of what sort of allocation criteria and eligibility criteria to be applied. In some countries, unfortunately, we sometimes see that public funding systems is often driven political incentives and are used to punish some opposition parties based on the very unfair eligibility criteria, for example. So there are some downsides system as well, but in general, certainly I think the South Africa's case, a case in point, but there's a very good potential in public funding to limit the incentives on the parties to look for illicit funding. Thank you.
Can I,
Yes, please. Yes, please, Ken.
can I say something about this, if you allow me? I mean, one of the things that is important when it comes to public funding, which I think is a very important tool to regulate the flow of money into politics, and one, moreover, that is used by the vast majority of countries that decide to do something about the role of money in politics. One thing that is important to bear in mind is that we should moderate our expectations. I mean, generally speaking, what I found when I did research on the effects of public funding was that public funding was a relatively blunt instrument to control levels of corruption, because in a lot of places, parties and candidates basically find ways, use it to top up the money that they collect from private sources. Yet, at the same time, in a lot of places, and contingent on the design, on the way you design the system of public funding, it can have a really powerful effect in leveling the playing field. And I think Mexico is a particularly powerful example of that. I mean, I fail to imagine, you know, how the party system in Mexico would have evolved in a way that was able to generate a transition to democracy without public funding in very generous amounts, as related by Councillor Nordman. So I think this is important. The second thing that I'm going to say about public funding is that, well, there are political difficulties in enacting public funding, because as we know well, political parties are vastly unpopular all over the world. So the idea of passing on public resources from the long-suffering taxpayers onto party coffers is extraordinarily unsexy, right, for most voters. So the only way to make that palatable is for the enactment or the increase of public funding to come attached to increase transparency regulations for political parties. That's the only way to sell it politically. Otherwise, it's politically inviable. And since I have the floor, I'm going to say a couple more things because I can't resist the temptation. One is about one of the questions that has already been sent to the moderator, which I'm going to read.
Yes,
is the question sent by Zoe Petlan. And it reads like this: one main concern raises the influence of external funding on politics, especially in electoral financing. In many poor countries, this poses the risk of eroding sovereignty. Are there any best practices, lessons, and thoughts to address this? I mean, this is an important question. Most, or you know, a really high number of countries, I mean, there's information about this in the report, ban foreign contributions, right? So that's a very standard part of the arsenal that countries use to regulate the role of money in politics. Obviously, this is contingent on the implementation of those regulations. I mean, some countries, it works better than in others. One thing that I'm going to say is that something that doesn't help is something that just happened in the US, namely that the RICO Act, and the RICO Act, RICO stands for Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, which is a law that was enacted in the US, I think in the 1970s, in the wake of Watergate, which basically make US corporations criminally liable should they engage in trying to bribe public officials or trying to engage in trying to influence political decisions in other countries. Well, over the past few weeks, it was announced that the RICO Act would not be enforced. And this is mightily important, more than most people realize, because, again, one of the things that I found when I did research on this in Latin America is that, contrary to a lot of, you know, urban myths out there, US-based corporations were quite shy about contributing to campaigns in Latin America, for example. They were very, very reluctant, and they were really, really concerned about the possibility of being found criminally liable for doing so. Well, that's gone out the window, and it remains to be seen what effect it will have in terms of increasing the flow of money coming out of the US all over the world. But I would think that this is a particular concern in Latin America. And my final comment is, one about the discussion as a whole. I mean, one of the things mentioned by Councillor Norma, I think is very important to bear in mind. I mean, this notion that regulation of money in politics is an iterative process, right? I mean, you regulate, and then parties and political actors find the way to go around the norms, and then you have to regulate again in a different way, and then they find a way around the norms. I mean, this is a never-ending story. And one of the things that is very important in these discussions, and here, I guess I'll engage in a little bit of self-criticism, is that when we have these discussions, we don't have the real experts around the table, which are political parties. Political parties are the real masters when it comes to political finance. I mean, we might style ourselves as experts in political finance. Those guys are the real experts. And it's very important to have them around the table when we have one of these discussions, because it is their actions that bring to life this iterative process whereby regulations are they have to be updated constantly, because otherwise they become empty shells. So this is a call for the next time that we have one of these conversations to bring someone from political parties, because those guys are the real experts. I mean, we just play the part, but those guys are the experts.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your reflection on very important issues, including on the issue of foreign funding. While we're talking about funding, there is one more question from James Cleaver, and he asks, several countries have implemented outright bans or partial limits on corporate donations. Are there any countries that stand out for effectively regulating the risks of corruption or foreign influence in company donations? I'm wondering who'd like to take that question. Sam, Councillor Norma, Kay, Victoria.
Comment.
Yes, please. You are breaking up. Perhaps it worked last time when you switched off your video, so let's try that.
Okay. Yeah.
It's
No, this time it's not working.
yeah, it's not really working. So I'm wondering if Sam, you'd like to jump in on this one particularly.
Sure, yeah, I can I can jump in, and I think I get where this question is coming from, and frankly, the best way to limit. So I think the idea is that you can effectively get foreign money into another country if you have a corporation in that country, and then donate money via that corporation, as was mooted in the UK, by the way, by Elon Musk late last year, through his ownership of Twitter. Frankly, the best way to regulate that is by banning corporate donations. The thing with corporate donations is you can tie them to tax earned in that country. That makes sense. You can tie them to tax paid in that country, I should say. You can tie them to profits made in that country. But incredibly rich people who own an incredible amount of corporations, and those corporations which which make a lot of money in those countries, they will always be able to do it. The way to prevent that happening, if you want to prevent it, as happens in countries like Canada, Estonia, Brazil, is to ban corporate donations outright, or at least severely limit corporate donations. The problem with that, particularly in somewhere like the UK, is that if you ban or limit corporate donations, you then have to do something about trade union donations. Otherwise, it seems incredibly partisan. So you butt up against quite a political problem. But the best solution to do it, I think, is to ban them.
Thank you, Sam. And I think Councillor Norma wanted to jump in because particularly she wanted to share the experience of Mexico. But I'll ask, we have actually run out of time, but we have such interesting question. I would like to take one last one from the audience, which actually is very relevant to Councillor Norma. And it's from Mauricio Dorfler. The question is a bit long. I'll try to summarize it. The question is, given the growing nexus between political finance and transnational organized crime in Latin America, what are the most effective strategies to foster coordination between electoral management bodies and state institutions with preventive or coercive mandates? So perhaps, Councillor Norma, you can give it another shot. We will see if your audio works this time.
I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Good. Well, I think is a very of course, it's not just an interesting question. It's a worry for all of us not just in Latin America. So because it's not just this illegal funding. So how do we avoid it? So once it's just not just the regulations, but how we can put it into practice. Because I was saying, in Mexico, for example, the corporations cannot make donations, the trade unions cannot make donations, and even so, we did this generous public funding, and with the limitations of the funding that even the sympathizers or civil society can do for their campaigns, is not enough. We have you wouldn't think that once you have such a generous public funding, the looking for illegal funding would be discouraged, but we can see that it's not. We need to do a lot of work, and this is why the collaboration, for example, with the banking, with the tax authority, all of that allowed us to make this investigation and find out what is the source of this funding that doesn't come from the public. But this is not enough. For that, you need to have and I think Kevin, I agree, we need to have a global cooperation, because if we don't have all our financial authorities doesn't talk with other countries where the money comes from, it's going to be very difficult to follow the money. So I think we need to have a more robust collaboration in a very a lot more wider range, because we are finding very new ways of looking for funding. So I think it's necessary, as Kevin was saying, not just to have a standard, but to have a standard where we can apply globally and sanction if there are no, if we don't comply, or whoever doesn't comply. Then you have to have a sanction, either public, monetary. So we have a consequence. I think what the public don't want to see is that you make illegally finance and nothing happens. I think that's one of the main concerns. The sense that we are powerless against the big money that want to manipulate or leak your government, your Congress, and all of these elected positions. I think that's one of the big challenges that we have ahead. And with this work,
thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And Kevin would like to add.
I mean, just very quickly, I fully agree that things like working closely with the bank authorities, with tax authorities, and just generally properly enforced controls over political finance might be able, in some cases, to help with regards to the penetration of money from organized crime. But I will add something that I think is vital in this discussion. When it comes to organized crime and the risk it poses in terms of trying to inject itself into campaigns, pay particular attention to the local level, because that's the weakest link. Criminal syndicates usually don't need to have the Minister of Public Security in their payroll. They need the local policeman, the local police officer. They don't need to have the Minister of Finance in their payroll. They need the local customs guy. That's the kind of influence that they require to operate. So the local level, which is usually poorly served by regulation and is not usually sexy for the press, to follow the money. The local level is where the real danger of the penetration of organized crime in political finance is. So pay particular attention to the local level.
Thank you, Kevin, for reiterating that. And just for final reflections, I would like to invite Kay to just wrap it up for today. We have run out of time, as I said, but yes, please go ahead for your final words.
Just a final word. We have the occasion to make a difference this year at COSP in Doha in December. So let's unite around that. And if you want to read more about Transparency International's recommendations, I have dropped in the chat box, the link to the Global Standards for Integrity in Political Finance, which complements very well International Ideas report. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kay. For 20 seconds, any final reflection from any of our speakers, panel members? This is your moment. Otherwise, great. As we come to close today's discussion, I just want to sincerely thank all our speakers, our panelists for their time and valuable insights. Tackling corruption in political finance is both a political and a technical challenge, but as we have heard, it's also an area where reform is possible, when evidence, advocacy, and action align. Let's take today's conversation as motivation to push forward, not just in diagnosis, but in collective solutions. Thank you to our participants for joining us from all around the world, and I hope we start new conversations and forge stronger partnerships on this important agenda. Please write to us. We are keen to hear your thoughts and continue our engagement on the issue. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.